Today, we're going to go into the science on different types of overtraining, how overtraining negatively affects your performance. Perhaps one of the most fundamental concepts for training for cycling or just for fitness in general is the concept of progressive overload, which means that if you want to get fitter, faster, stronger, etc., you need to constantly increase the amount of stress that you're giving your body. Give your body the same amount of stress that it's already adapted to, and it'll stop making adaptations. The other side of the coin is that if you give your body too much training stimulus, this is called overtraining, and in this scenario as well, you'll also see a fitness plateau or even a decline. Motivated athletes often don't want to admit that they need to back it down on their training until it's too late. Determining where that line is between too little and too much is the art of proper training, but knowing the signs and symptoms of overtraining can help you assess whether or not you've reached that point. First off, it's important to make the distinction between overreaching and overtraining. This review on the signs and symptoms of overtraining stated that if training load is increased, producing a decrease in performance, and subsequent rest brings performance to a higher level, this is termed overreaching or supercompensation. The key there is that this is training that will temporarily reduce performance, but once you rest, you'll actually return stronger. Overreaching is necessary for making fitness gains and breaking through fitness plateaus. It's stressing your body more than it's already been stressed, which is necessary for progressive overload. The step beyond overreaching is overtraining, and it has an important difference. Increases in training load accompanied by performance decrements and physical and psychological symptoms is termed staleness overtraining or chronic overtraining and may take weeks to months to recover from. Overtraining is not something that you return stronger from. If it takes you weeks to months to recover from the damage that you've done, that ship has sailed. So where is the line between overreaching and overtraining? Some articles do attempt to quantify the difference. For example, this article on overtraining and recovery states that if you failed to recover after more than 72 hours, you may have reached negative overtraining and are in an overreached state. This review states that overreaching is reversible in days to weeks. Overtraining further divides into two types: monotonous program overtraining and chronic overwork. In monotonous overtraining, there may be a loss or plateau in performance due to constant unvarying use of the same type of exercise and training, and not because of overwork or excessive fatigue. This is what I talk about when I talk about periodization, varying training over time, and progressive overload. If training is monotonous and unchanging, performance will stagnate, and this is what's meant by monotonous overtraining. Unfortunately, this type of overtraining is a lot easier to fix and simply requires you varying your training and won't require weeks to months to recover from. Overwork is what you might typically think of as overtraining, where you've been working too hard for too long and now you're cooked. If the period of overwork is short-term, that's overreaching, which isn't so much of an issue. But if it's chronic, then we get overtraining, which can be further divided into two types. Remember that your sympathetic nervous system is associated with fight or flight, and your parasympathetic nervous system is associated with rest. The sympathetic form of overtraining is characterized by increased sympathetic activity at rest, while the parasympathetic form is characterized by decreased sympathetic activity at rest and during exercise. It is believed that sympathetic overtraining syndrome is an intermediate stage before parasympathetic overtraining. Essentially, sympathetic overtraining is less serious. Once you've gone into parasympathetic overtraining, you've really screwed yourself. And the danger is that the symptoms for parasympathetic overtraining are less obvious. With the sympathetic type, symptoms include loss of motivation, irritability, depression, insomnia, decreased appetite, decrease in lean body mass, increased heart rate, increased cortisol, decreased testosterone, decreased glycogen levels, chronic fatigue, and a loss in performance. If you've noticed that you've lost motivation to ride, it may not be a motivation issue, it may be because you're overtrained. Same with feeling effect. Parasympathetic overtraining symptoms include phlegmatic behavior, depression, increased sleep, normal appetite, normal body mass, low heart rate, hypoglycemia, and low blood lactate levels. Parasympathetic overtraining is an advanced stage of overtraining and may be difficult to recognize. Normal appetite, normal body mass, low heart rate sounds like business as usual, right? Fortunately, few athletes will ever get to this point. In order to prevent this from happening to you, after all, overtraining appears to be caused by too much high-intensity training and/or too little recovery time, often combined with other training and non-training stressors. The recovery side of the equation is important and contributes to overtraining. More job stress, family stress, life stress, etc., will affect how much training you're able to absorb before you hit your limit. Nutrition, of course, plays an important role too. For example, high antioxidant fruits and vegetables have been shown to aid in recovery. You may have heard some bodybuilder types on the internet saying there's no such thing as overtraining, just undereating. Eating enough likely helps prevent overtraining, but don't think that you can out-eat overtraining. At some point, you've simply done too much work and no amount of calories will reverse that. Let's talk quickly about sleep. Sleep has been found to be one of the single best recovery strategies available to athletes. Ironically, overtraining also causes sleep problems. This seems like it could cause a negative spiral pretty quickly. Sleep will outperform any other recovery aid. Going back to the review article on overtraining in athletes, they state that an in-depth knowledge of periodization may be necessary for the prevention of overtraining, as periodization provides a framework for incorporating intensive training and regeneration periods in the appropriate ratio and volume in a training program. Make sure in your training week you have at least 2 rest days or active recovery days, and in your training month, make sure that you have a recovery week with reduced volume and intensity of training to rid your body of the fatigue that you've built up over the course of the month. 2 or 3 high-intensity days per week has been shown to be optimal. More than this is not only not beneficial, essentially, if you go over zone 2, you start to accumulate autonomic stress. This isn't a big deal if it's done a couple days in a row, but do this day after day for weeks on end, and you start to develop staleness or a feeling like you just can't put out power. Having this dichotomy between very hard days and very easy days has been shown to not only lead to better performance gains, but less perceived fatigue from training. Your average training week should have 2 hard days, 2 recovery days, and the rest should be zone 2, or I'll see you in the next one.